We've got a question from Alex Dirksen. Shout out to Alex. He's going to be coming on placement with me in a little under a month.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah,
Forum members. That's awesome.
exactly. That's how I initially made contact with him. Found out he was at my PT school, and I said, hey, I offer placements. You should check it out. And now here we are. So his question is, best way for a student to learn about integrating strength and conditioning into rehab. So shameless plug, Clinical Athlete is a fantastic way to learn about how to integrate strength and conditioning into rehab. And I think that I'll start with just how I did that and then synthesize some thoughts into what I think other students can do. So I did my undergrad in kinesiology. I worked for a year as a kinesiologist before getting into PT school because no one would let me in the first time around. And so that gave me an opportunity to start to apply a lot of the stuff that I learned in my undergrad. And I've been training in one form or fashion for a while, whether it was for football in high school and then just training for hypertrophy and eventually try to compete in bodybuilding for a while, and now for powerlifting. So I've kind of been seeking out this sort of information for myself for a long time, and then figuring out how to apply it to the people that I was working with clinically. And then getting into PT school, thankfully it's something that's changing, but with the program that I went through, there wasn't a big emphasis on strength and conditioning. I don't think there was a lot of really, really good information on that particular topic. And Quinn, something that you've said before is that PT school is not meant to make you a strength and conditioning coach. It's meant to make you a generalist, it's meant to make you a physical therapist. You can pass your boards. And I agree with that entirely. So I think that for now, for probably the majority of PT schools, there's a bit of extra legwork required. You kind of have to go out and find some stuff. But some resources that come to mind that are fantastic are Scientific Principles of Strength Training. And that's by Juggernaut and Renaissance Periodization. Is that correct, Quinn? Perfect. Also, Eric Helms put out a little while ago 2 ebooks, the muscle and strength pyramids, I think they're called. One is on nutrition, one is on training. I picked those up a couple years ago, and as someone who was fairly familiar with most of the content in there, I thought that was a great refresher. Eric does a great job of putting it into terms that almost anybody, or literally anybody, could understand. So I'd highly recommend that. Let me toss it to you, Quinn, as I keep thinking about other resources. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I had a similar background. I came in with an exercise science undergraduate degree and worked as a strength and conditioning coach for several facilities. That's what I wanted to do. I decided after the fact, probably a year later, that I wanted to go back to PT school. So my experience came by way of strength and conditioning and sports performance internships and working in the field for about a year and a half at several facilities before going back to PT school. So I guess I was lucky enough to have that background. I think that what you just described, or the resource, so Eric Helms was on my list, Brad Schoenfeld, his literature, Greg Nuckols is a guy,
we're
just kind of throwing out resources that you can just go dive into. Greg Nuckols is a guy who he synthesizes the research in a very digestible form, and he's a friggin' genius.
He does meta-analyses for fun.
Yeah. So, but his blog, Stronger by Science, is amazing because he synthesizes everything down to digestible formats. And then Mike Zordos, who is him, Eric, and Greg collaborate on lots of different projects, and those 3 are awesome. You mentioned Scientific Principles of Strength Training. They also have RP also has a book called How Much Should I Train? I think also just dive into some of the literature. That's going to be a question or answer to all these questions that have to do with like what's the best way to learn. I think people are, and I kind of still like, you get intimidated by the amount of literature that's out there. But if you just got to ask a question. So what is the question that you got to dig it specific. So like best way to learn about integrating strength and conditioning into rehab, well, that's a very, very broad general topic. Break that down into specific subsets. What exactly about strength and conditioning into rehab? Strength training, power output, or recovering from specific injuries? Ask and then look for those specific questions in Google Scholar, PubMed, and just do kind of a brain dump with a bunch of different keywords and get maybe get 10 papers on the subject or close to the subject as possible. And then it's brain reps. Just start digging into those papers. What you don't understand or what you still have questions with, then that's a great time to throw it to the Clinical Athlete Forum or another resource like that, where you have a circle of people who can help you synthesize things. So you go back, you do your own study, deliberate practice with reading literature, and then you come back to a group, you discuss, and then you go back on your own and you read and you ponder and you think about it, and then you go back to the group, back and forth, back and forth. But I think just don't be afraid to just start diving into stuff and reading. So it's important to understand that, like, we named all those, well, Brad and Eric and Mike are researchers. Greg was on our podcast. He actually said he probably won't ever do a formalized research study because he doesn't like the system, which I totally respect. But
yeah, man.
Yeah. Also understand too that, like, reading, you don't just want to read one person's stuff, especially if it's like blog form, because we all have our biases. So just start digging into all those resources, and especially the scientific literature, and then get some circles to discuss it. I really think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and another plug for a webinar that's upcoming. Mel Davis, who works with Renaissance, she's going to be doing a webinar in January on reading and interpreting scientific literature. And like Quinn said, like I'm still kind of getting used to digging in there, looking for papers that might supply some information to help answer a question that I have, and figuring out what makes a good study. Was this well designed? What were the flaws? What are the things that I can take from this while still being accurate in terms of the findings that they had? So it's pretty daunting, and this is not super related to the question, but when patients or clients ask you about certain things, I think that's another art, to be able to answer things concisely while still being accurate to what the research says. Because it's easy to give a nice soundbite that doesn't do justice or loses some bit of accuracy in terms of what a paper or papers or resources found or are saying, just for the sake of being easy to say. And it's a skill to be able to preserve that accuracy and not drone on for a long time. That's a skill that I don't always have.
Oh, I struggle with it too. I was going to say also, when I was thinking back to physical therapy school, I would, on weekends, when I was on clinical in my physical therapy internships and my rotations during the week, on the weekends I would travel to different gyms and to train, myself, but also to just pick the brains of the coaches in the area, because there would always be weightlifting gyms or strength and conditioning facilities in which I always wanted to visit, or coaches that I really looked up to, at least within driving distance. And so on the weekends I would make those trips, and that was really, really helpful. Especially if you don't have a strength and conditioning background, just reading stuff is like, it obviously it sets the groundwork, but it's kind of like learning physical therapy without ever seeing a patient. Once you have a real human in front of you, it's like all bets are off.
Yeah.
None of that stuff that you learn from books has any context. It might as well be alien language. And then it's like, oh, that's what I read. I learned that. And now this is what it actually looks like in a real life human. So yeah. I would recommend, if Alex, I don't know if you know any strength and conditioning facilities in the area, Jared, but if, Alex on the weekends could go and hang out with some coaches in the area or some gyms, or where, at any time during his didactic physical therapy education, try to get out there and just get into some facilities, almost like a little shadowing.
Yeah, a few come to mind. And I'm really glad that you said that, Quinn, because that just brought to mind an episode of the Jug Life podcast, where Chad was talking about his first few years, really trying to learn all he could as a strength coach, and like traveling around, and went to Joe Franco's gym, and there are at least one or two coaches that Chad really looked up to, and remembers very fondly. And you could find a ton of stories that are similar to that in the strength coach world. People who just kind of grind it out and learn from as many people as they can to be as good as they can, and early on. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, and Juggernaut's obviously a great resource as well.
Absolutely.
Strength and conditioning. Okay, good question.